Hey everyone, ready to dive into a fascinating new book with us?
Definitely. This one's called Soul Wounds, the intersection of trauma, body, and soul, just released today.
That's right, October 18th, 2024. Mark your calendars. It's by Bakhet Ma'at Sat Ra, and it's a really insightful look at how trauma affects us.
Not just on an emotional level either, but a spiritual one too, blending ancient wisdom with modern research.
I'm hooked already. And listen, for anyone out there feeling the weight of trauma in their own lives, this book could be a powerful guide to help you release that pain, reconnect with yourself, and recover.
You can find Soul Wounds, the intersection of trauma, body, and soul on Amazon. We'll also drop a link in the show notes.
Okay, let's dive right in. The book jumps right into this idea of soul wounds. Can you elaborate on what that means? It feels like a much deeper concept than just your average emotional scar, right?
Absolutely. The author's point is that trauma really shakes up our connection to ourselves, to our communities, even to the universe.
Wow.
The book dives into the science of trauma, the neurological and physiological impacts, but its real focus is on that added spiritual dimension of healing.
And it even brings up W.E.B. Du Bois, the concept of double consciousness, and his book, The Souls of Black Folk. That connection to racial trauma feels particularly relevant.
Right. The book links Du Bois' work directly to the historical trauma experienced by Black Americans. It argues that this trauma contributes to a kind of spiritual crisis, a sense of disconnect from one's ancestral roots, and that this historical weight factors into the disparities we see today.
It's a heavy weight to carry.
It is, and it's a concept the book calls race battle fatigue, a term coined by Dr. William Smith.
To clarify for our listener, race battle fatigue refers to the mental and emotional exhaustion people of color face when constantly navigating racial microaggressions and discrimination. It's this constant underlying stress that can really wear a person down.
Exactly. And the book suggests that this ongoing stress can actually make the soul wounds even deeper, making healing that much more difficult.
That makes a lot of sense. And this whole idea ties into something else that really resonated with me, the concept of intergenerational trauma, the idea that trauma can be passed down through generations.
And what's fascinating is the way the book connects that to actual physical changes in our biology through epigenetics. There's even a study mentioned where mice were conditioned to fear a certain smell, and their offspring, who had never even encountered that smell, also displayed a fear response.
Wow, so we're not just talking about abstract emotional inheritance here, but potential biological changes too. It really highlights how deeply trauma can embed itself in us and our families, even over generations.
It's heavy stuff for sure, but what's interesting is that the book doesn't leave us in that darkness. It actually points to ancient spiritual traditions as a source of healing and emphasizes that healing is an ongoing journey, not a final destination.
It's about understanding where we've come from, facing our present reality, and using ancient wisdom to navigate the complexity of it all. For example, the book talks about Kemetic yoga, this ancient Egyptian practice.
And the ancient Egyptians didn't see the soul as this one-dimensional thing, but rather as having multiple layers. They believed in this idea of ma'at, which essentially translates to truth, balance, cosmic order, as being vital for spiritual well-being.
They even had these 42 negative confessions, which sound kind of intense.
Well, they were essentially affirmations of aligning oneself with Ma'at. Think of them as a way for the ancient Egyptians to acknowledge and hopefully avoid negative actions, fostering spiritual wellness by living in alignment with those universal truths.
That's a really interesting concept. And then there's the Yoruba tradition, which is completely new to me. The book mentions these figures called orishas, and even tells you how to set up an altar for them. What are orishas?
In the Yoruba tradition, orishas are deities, each representing different energies of the universe, and they can offer guidance in our lives. So creating an orisha altar would be a way to connect with a specific energy you feel drawn to or need guidance from.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it's about making a tangible, physical representation of a spiritual connection.
Exactly. And the book actually gives you instructions for creating altars for specific orishas, like Ocean, who represents love, beauty, and wealth, or Shango, the orisha of thunder, fire, and masculinity.
That's incredible. There are so many ancient practices the book highlights, like the use of water rituals for healing. It mentions this in the context of both African and indigenous traditions. Talking to water for healing, though, that sounds almost mystical.
It might sound unusual at first, but water has this incredibly rich history of being revered as a healing element. The book mentions Mamiwata, a powerful water spirit in African spirituality, and emphasizes this deep connection to our ancestors and the natural world through water.
It's amazing how much ancient wisdom and potential for healing the book finds in these traditions. But it doesn't just talk theory, it actually gives readers practical tools to start their own healing journeys.
Right, exactly. It stresses things like mindfulness, being aware of your body, the power of prayer, and connecting with your community. It even gets into specific exercises like mindful breathing techniques and grounding practices.
These are all things you could start incorporating into your life today.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how much this book covers. So, if our listeners were to take away just one thing from Soul Wounds, what would you want that to be?
That healing from trauma, healing those soul wounds, is absolutely possible. It's a journey, not a destination.
I love that.
It demands that we actively participate in our own healing, but it's a journey worth taking.
It feels hopeful. Okay, so we've talked about those soul wounds and how the book approaches healing, but it also goes into some pretty profound concepts, starting with this idea of the Congo cosmogram.
Right. The Congo cosmogram, sometimes called the 4 moments of the sun, is a really powerful symbol in many African traditions. It's basically a circle divided into 4 points, representing birth, adulthood, death, and the ancestral realm, all connected by a central axis that represents the never-ending flow of time.
So it's a visual representation of the cyclical nature of life, the idea that our souls are always moving through these different stages.
Exactly. And it ties in beautifully with the book's overall message of healing and spiritual growth. It's a reminder that even though we experience trauma and pain, life continues to move and evolve, and so do we.
I love that perspective. It's a really powerful reminder that we're not defined by our wounds. Speaking of which, the book also talks about how a soul wound can weaken the soul, disconnecting it from its purpose. And it looks at this idea from different spiritual perspectives.
Yes. For example, in Kemetic tradition, maintaining that balanced truth and cosmic order we talked about is key to keeping the soul strong. Whereas in Christianity, it's the soul's purity that's tested by sin.
It's interesting to see those parallels, how different traditions approach this idea of the soul's vulnerability.
And what I find fascinating is how the book connects these ideas back to the experience of trauma, suggesting that regardless of your spiritual beliefs, trauma has the power to disrupt the soul's equilibrium.
So no matter your faith, experiencing trauma can create a spiritual crisis, a sense of being unmoored, disconnected from something larger than yourself.
Exactly. And the book argues that to truly heal those wounds, we have to address that spiritual dimension, not just the psychological and emotional aspects.
That makes a lot of sense. And this is where those practical tools the book talks about, mindfulness, breath work, connecting with your community, come into play.
Right, they provide a pathway to start addressing those spiritual wounds, to reconnect with yourself and something bigger.
That feels like a good place to pause for now. Ever feel like you're drowning in to-do lists?
Yeah.
Especially if you're a solopreneur, nomadpreneur, juggling a million things at once for your startup. Clients, projects, invoices, it's a lot.
It really is. For small businesses and startups, time equals money, right? Every minute you're not bogged down in admin is a minute you could be growing your business.
And that's where B1 Thrive says their Thrive Cloud comes in. Could Thrive Cloud be like your secret weapon?
Yeah.
Getting all that admin stuff organized, giving you more time to actually focus on your business.
It's definitely worth checking out. It's user-friendly, it's affordable, it works wherever you are. That's a pretty compelling package for solopreneurs, nomadpreneurs, startups, anyone really. And don't forget, they've got that free trial.
Exactly. Go to b1thrive.com, give it a shot, let us know what you think.
Yeah.
You might just find that Thrive Cloud is that missing piece you've been looking for, even if your office is a beach in Bali. We've covered a lot of ground, from the concept of soul wounds to the Congo cosmogram.
There's still so much to unpack, though.
Welcome back. Last time we left off talking about how trauma can impact us spiritually, creating what this book calls soul wounds.
And we started to touch on some of the ways the book suggests addressing those wounds, like through mindfulness and connecting with community.
You know, one thing that strikes me is how easy it is to overlook those spiritual aspects of healing. We often focus so much on the psychological and emotional, but this book really highlights the importance of addressing that spiritual disconnect.
Absolutely. And one of the concepts the book brings up is the idea of soul retrieval, which really resonated with me.
Can you refresh our listeners' memory on what exactly soul retrieval is? It sounds pretty intense.
Well, the book talks about how trauma can actually cause parts of our soul to fragment, almost like pieces of ourselves scattering in the aftermath of a difficult experience. Soul retrieval, which is a practice found in many indigenous cultures, focuses on reclaiming those lost parts of ourselves and becoming whole again.
So it's almost like a spiritual reintegration, bringing those fragmented pieces back together.
That's a great way to put it. And while the book doesn't go into a ton of detail about the specific techniques involved in soul retrieval, it does stress the importance of seeking out a qualified practitioner, someone experienced in this kind of work.
That makes sense. It sounds like something that requires a lot of sensitivity and expertise.
Absolutely. And the book encourages readers to do their research, find a practitioner they connect with and trust, and to create a safe and sacred space for the soul retrieval journey.
So it's about setting the stage for healing, both internally and externally.
Exactly. And it's important to go into it with intention, a clear idea of what you're hoping to heal or reclaim through the process. It's a powerful practice with the potential to facilitate deep healing and transformation.
That's incredible. You know, speaking of recognizing the need for healing, the book also talks about recognizing signs of spiritual struggle, especially after trauma.
Right. And it points out some really common experiences, like feeling disconnected from your faith, even if you used to feel very connected, or a sense that your life lacks purpose or meaning.
Or even struggling with anger or resentment towards a higher power.
Exactly. And it also mentions things like feeling spiritually numb or empty, or just having a hard time connecting with your usual spiritual practices.
It's like that connection has been severed or dampened by the trauma.
And these are all valid experiences, and the book really encourages anyone who's feeling those things to seek out support.
Whether that's through a spiritual community, a therapist, or even a mentor, it's about recognizing that we don't have to navigate those struggles alone.
And on the flip side, the book also offers guidance on recognizing signs of progress in our spiritual healing.
What kind of signs are we talking about?
Well, it could be feeling a renewed sense of hope or purpose, like you're moving forward again, or feeling more connected to your faith, if that's part of your life.
Or even just a general sense of peace and acceptance, like you're making peace with what happened.
Exactly. And it could also manifest physically, like feeling more grounded and connected to your body, or experiencing a release of that anger or resentment we talked about.
So it's about paying attention to those shifts, both internal and external, as signs that we're on the right track.
And celebrating those victories, no matter how small they might seem.
I love that.
Yeah,
It's about honoring the journey, even when it's challenging.
absolutely. And speaking of navigating those challenges, one thing the book cautions against is something called spiritual bypassing.
Spiritual bypassing. That's a new one. What does that mean?
It's essentially using spirituality as a way to avoid dealing with difficult emotions or experiences.
So instead of facing those painful feelings head on, we try to transcend them or pray them away.
Exactly. And while it's natural to seek comfort and solace in our spirituality, the book makes it clear that true healing requires us to acknowledge and process those difficult emotions, not bypass them.
It's about finding a balance between honoring our spiritual practices and doing the messy work of emotional processing.
Right. And it's important to remember that spirituality can be a powerful tool for healing, but it shouldn't be used as a way to escape reality or numb ourselves to pain.
It's about using spirituality to support our healing, not to circumvent it.
Exactly. And one concept the book explores that relates to this idea of facing those darker emotions is the concept of the shadow self.
The shadow self, is that like our evil twin?
Not quite. The book draws on the work of Carl Jung, who believed that everyone has a shadow self, which is essentially a part of our unconscious mind that contains all the aspects of ourselves we deem unacceptable or undesirable. It's not about being good or evil, but about acknowledging the full spectrum of who we are, including those parts we might try to suppress or deny.
So it's about bringing those hidden aspects of ourselves into the light of awareness.
And doing so with compassion and curiosity rather than judgment.
That makes sense. It's
Yeah.
not about condemning those parts of ourselves, but about understanding them and integrating them into our sense of wholeness.
And the book suggests that by facing and embracing our shadow selves, we can actually unlock a lot of wisdom and potential for growth.
It's about recognizing that even those parts of ourselves we might not have something to teach us.
Exactly. And that by integrating them, we can live more authentically and fully.
I love that perspective. It's about embracing all of who we are, light and shadow.
Absolutely. And another important aspect of healing that the book delves into is the importance of grounding.
grounding, like literally connecting with the earth.
Exactly. It's about feeling rooted and present in your body, which can be especially helpful when dealing with the emotional and spiritual upheaval of trauma.
Because trauma can make us feel so disconnected, so out of touch with ourselves and our surroundings.
Right. And the book actually offers some simple grounding techniques, like standing barefoot on the ground, really feeling your feet connected to the earth.
Or even just focusing on your breath, bringing your attention to the present moment.
These practices can be incredibly powerful in calming the nervous system and helping us feel safe and anchored in our bodies.
It's about coming back to ourselves, back to the present moment.
And that sense of being present and grounded can be incredibly healing, especially after experiencing something traumatic.
It makes a lot of sense. And grounding ties into another concept the book emphasizes: setting boundaries.
Boundaries are essential for protecting our physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being.
So it's about setting limits in our relationships, deciding what we will and won't tolerate.
Exactly, and communicating those limits clearly to others.
It's about recognizing our own needs and honoring them, even if it means saying no to others.
And the book stresses that setting healthy boundaries is a form of self-care, a way to protect our energy and create a sense of safety and stability in our lives.
It's about creating a life that feels sustainable and aligned with our values.
Absolutely. And speaking of values, one concept the book explores that might seem a little paradoxical at first is the idea of sacred rage.
Sacred rage. Isn't rage usually seen as a negative emotion?
It can be, especially when it's uncontrolled or destructive.
But you're saying there's a sacred element to rage.
The book argues that rage, in this context, is about the righteous anger we feel in response to injustice, oppression, or violation. It's about refusing to be silent or passive in the face of suffering.
So it's about channeling that anger into action, into creating positive change.
Exactly. And the book encourages us to embrace our sacred rage, but to do so consciously and intentionally.
It's about finding healthy outlets for that anger, whether that's through activism, creative expression, or simply speaking up for ourselves and others.
It's about harnessing that powerful energy and using it as a force for good.
That's a powerful reframing of rage. It's not about lashing out, but about channeling that energy for positive change.
Exactly. And speaking of harnessing energy, the book also talks about the importance of ritual in the healing process.
Ritual, like specific ceremonies or practices.
It can be, but it can also be much simpler than that. The book talks about ritual as a way to mark transitions, to process emotions, to connect with our spirituality.
So it could be something as simple as creating a daily ritual of self-care, like taking a bath or lighting a candle.
Exactly. Or it could be creating a ritual to help you move through grief or find forgiveness.
It's about creating a structure for healing and transformation.
And the book encourages us to find rituals that resonate with us, whether they're drawn from a specific tradition or created from our own intuition.
It's about finding what feels meaningful and empowering to us.
And speaking of empowerment, one concept the book explores that's closely tied to healing is spiritual awakening.
Spiritual awakening, it sounds almost mystical.
It can be, but it's essentially about a shift in consciousness, a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe.
What causes that kind of shift?
It can be triggered by a lot of things, from profound life changes to trauma to simply a deep yearning for something more.
And what are some of the signs of spiritual awakening?
It can manifest in many ways, but often it involves a sense of interconnectedness, a feeling of being part of something much larger than ourselves.
It can also lead to a questioning of old beliefs and a desire to live more authentically.
Exactly. And the book stresses that spiritual awakening isn't a destination, but rather a journey, an ongoing process of growth and transformation.
It's about continually expanding our awareness and deepening our connection to something greater than ourselves.
And that journey of spiritual awakening can be a powerful force for healing and transformation.
It's about finding meaning and purpose, even in the midst of suffering.
And speaking of finding meaning, the book also talks about the importance of purpose in the healing process.
Purpose, like finding our calling in life.
It can be, but it's also about connecting with our passions, our values, the things that light us up and give us a sense of direction.
Because trauma can often make us feel lost and uncertain about our place in the world.
Exactly. And the book encourages us to reconnect with those things that bring us joy, that make us feel alive.
It's about finding our way back to ourselves after trauma has shaken us to our core.
And purpose can be a powerful motivator for healing and growth.
It gives us something to strive for, something to believe in.
And along with purpose, the book highlights the importance of gratitude in the healing process.
Gratitude, even when we're hurting.
Especially when we're hurting. The book talks about how practicing gratitude, even for the smallest things, can shift our perspective and help us focus on the good in our lives.
Because it's easy to get caught up in the pain and negativity, to lose sight of the good.
And gratitude helps us to rewire our brains, to focus on the positive, even in the midst of challenges.
It's about training ourselves to see the good, to appreciate the blessings, big and small.
And that shift in perspective can be incredibly healing. It helps us to find hope even when things are tough.
It's about finding the light in the darkness.
And along with gratitude, the book also talks about the healing power of surrender.
Surrender, like giving up.
Not exactly. It's more about letting go of the need to control everything, to have all the answers.
Because we often resist what is. We fight against the pain. We try to force things to be different.
And that resistance creates suffering.
So surrender is about accepting what is, even if it's painful.
It's about surrendering to the present moment, trusting that there's a higher power at work, even if we don't understand it.
It's about letting go of the struggle and finding peace and acceptance.
And that kind of surrender can be incredibly freeing and healing.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this part.
We have. From soul retrieval and shadow work to grounding and gratitude, Soul Wounds offers a really comprehensive look at the multifaceted nature of healing from trauma.
It's been incredibly insightful.
It has. And there's still more to explore. You're on a beach in Bali, right? Working remotely.
Nice.
And you suddenly need client info, project deadlines, gotta send an invoice. Boom. ThriveCloud's supposed to put all that in one place.
For anyone out there feeling swamped, trying to run their business, think about it. Could ThriveCloud be like your secret weapon?
Yeah.
Getting all that admin stuff organized, giving you more time to actually focus on your business.
It's definitely worth checking out. It's user-friendly, it's affordable, it works wherever you are. That's a pretty compelling package for solopreneurs, nomadpreneurs, startups, anyone really. And don't forget, they've got that free trial.
Exactly. Go to b1thrive.com, give it a shot, let us know what you think.
Yeah.
You might just find that ThriveCloud is that missing piece you've been looking for, even if your office is a beach in Bali. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Bakhet Ma'at Sat Ra's Soul Wounds, the intersection of trauma, body, and soul. And wow, what a journey it's been.
It really has. We've delved into so many layers of healing, from the spiritual to the emotional, and explored fascinating concepts like soul retrieval and the power of sacred rage.
One of the things that really strikes me about this book is how it emphasizes the interconnectedness of our well-being. It's not just about addressing the psychological impacts of trauma, but also about tending to our spiritual and emotional selves.
Absolutely. The book really highlights how trauma can fracture our connection to ourselves, to others, and even to something larger than ourselves, creating those deep soul wounds.
And it offers a path forward, a roadmap for restoring those connections by weaving together ancient wisdom and modern insights.
It's a powerful blend of theory and practice, offering both profound spiritual concepts and tangible tools to help readers embark on their own healing journeys.
Speaking of tools, I'd love to delve into some of the specific practices the book recommends. In part 2, we talked about grounding and setting boundaries. But there's so much more to explore.
There really is, and one practice the book emphasizes, which might seem simple but is incredibly profound, is self-compassion.
Self-compassion. It sounds so basic, yet it can be so difficult, especially after experiencing trauma.
It really can. The book talks about how we often internalize the messages of our abusers or the oppressive systems we've endured, and we end up judging ourselves incredibly harshly.
It's like we turn that pain inward and become our own worst critics.
Exactly. And the book challenges us to really examine those negative self-beliefs, those voices that tell us we're not good enough, not worthy of love or healing.
It's about recognizing that those beliefs stem from the trauma, not from our inherent worth.
Exactly. And it encourages us to replace those harmful messages with ones of self-love, acceptance, and forgiveness.
It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and compassion we would offer a loved one who's hurting.
And that shift in perspective, from self-criticism to self-compassion, can be incredibly powerful in the healing process.
It's about recognizing that we deserve to heal, that we are worthy of love and support.
Absolutely. And alongside cultivating self-compassion, the book also highlights the importance of finding our voice.
Finding our voice. How does that tie into healing from trauma?
Well, trauma often silences us. It can make us afraid to speak our truth, to share our stories, to advocate for ourselves.
Like the trauma takes away our power, our agency.
Exactly. And the book encourages us to reclaim that power by finding our voice, by speaking up for ourselves and for others who have been silenced.
It's about breaking free from that silence and using our voices to heal and empower ourselves and others.
And that can look different for everyone. For some, it might mean sharing their story with a trusted friend or therapist. For others, it might mean engaging in activism or speaking out against injustice.
It's about finding ways to use our voices to create positive change, both in our own lives and in the world around us.
Exactly. And sometimes finding our voice requires the support of others, which is why the book emphasizes the importance of community in the healing process.
Community. Like finding a group of people who understand what we're going through.
Exactly. The book talks about how isolating trauma can be, how it can make us feel alone and disconnected.
And how that isolation can actually make the healing process even more difficult.
Right. So the book encourages us to seek out connection, whether that's through support groups, therapy, or spiritual communities.
It's about finding safe spaces where we can share our stories, offer and receive support, and realize that we're not alone in this journey.
And sometimes healing those deep soul wounds requires us to tap into different parts of ourselves, which is why the book highlights the power of creativity as a healing modality.
Creativity, like painting, writing, or dancing.
Exactly. The book talks about how creative expression can be a powerful way to process trauma, release emotions, and connect with our inner selves.
Because sometimes words aren't enough to express the depth of what we've experienced.
Exactly. And creativity allows us to tap into a different language, a language of emotions, colors, movements.
It's like giving voice to those parts of ourselves that words can't reach.
And that can be incredibly healing and empowering.
It's about finding outlets that allow us to express ourselves authentically and to tap into our innate creativity.
And speaking of tapping into our inner resources, the book also discusses the importance of gratitude in the healing process.
Gratitude. That might seem counterintuitive when we're in the midst of healing from trauma.
It might seem that way, but the book argues that cultivating gratitude, even for small things, can be incredibly powerful.
Because it's easy to get caught in a cycle of negativity, to focus on the pain and the hardship.
And gratitude helps us to shift our perspective, to rewire our brains to notice the good, even when things are tough.
It's about finding those glimmers of hope, those moments of joy, even amidst the darkness.
And it's not about denying the pain, but about choosing to focus on the good.
And finally, the book talks about the healing power of surrender.
Surrender can be a difficult concept to grasp, especially when we're talking about healing from trauma.
Because our instinct is often to fight, to control, to resist the pain.
Exactly. But the book suggests that sometimes the most healing thing we can do is surrender.
Surrender to what?
To what is, to the present moment, to the reality of our experience.
It's about letting go of the struggle, the resistance, the need to control.
And trusting that there's a higher power at work, even if we don't understand it.
It's about finding peace and acceptance, even when things are difficult.
Exactly. And that kind of surrender can be incredibly liberating and healing.
This deep dive into soul wounds has been incredibly insightful and thought-provoking.
It's been a privilege to explore these concepts with you.
And with our listeners, of course, it's got me thinking, what if true healing begins with acknowledging those soul wounds? Maybe by understanding those wounds, we can start to mend those fractured connections and embrace a path of profound healing and growth. Something to ponder as you continue your own journey.
It really is a journey.
And we want to thank you for joining us on this episode of The Deep Dive. Don't forget to check out Soul Wounds, The Intersection of Trauma, Body, and Soul by Bakhet Ma'at Sat Ra. Until next time, keep seeking, keep healing, and keep those spirits ignited.